It's a sweltering summer morning in 552 AD. The hills of Umbria lie quiet under the sun, the dry earth already radiating heat, as two armies prepare for battle near the town of Taginae. The Gothic War, now in its 18th year, has drained the Italian peninsula. What began as an ambitious campaign by Emperor Justinian to reclaim the Western Roman territories has become a grinding, destructive conflict. On one side stands Totila, the youthful and charismatic king of the Ostrogoths. Dressed in ornate armor and mounted on a warhorse, he leads a smaller but mobile force, relying on his elite cavalry and the terrain he has carefully chosen. On the other side, Narses, a court eunuch turned general, leads a much larger and more diverse Byzantine army, an unlikely commander whose quiet leadership and attention to detail have brought him to this moment. Both camps are filled with soldiers from across the known world, Greeks, Armenians, Huns, Goths, and others, praying, sharpening weapons, and preparing for what could be a decisive engagement. The Battle of Taginae won't yet bring the war to an end, but it will mark a turning point. By nightfall, one army will retreat, and one leader will not rise again. Following his spectacular victory at the Battle of Faventia in 542, Ostrogothic King Totila pressed on with his relentless campaign to reclaim Italy. In December 546, after a prolonged siege, he captured Rome. Though the city had lost much of its political and economic power, its symbolic weight remained immense. The siege brought severe famine, and internal betrayal ultimately opened the gates to Gothic forces. In a striking affront to the Eternal City, one of several yet to come before the war's end, Totila ordered the partial demolition of the Aurelian walls, delivering an unmistakably physical blow to Roman imperial authority. However, Totila's control over Rome was short-lived. In 547, the Byzantine general Belisarius recaptured the city and initiated repairs to its fortifications. Despite his efforts, Belisarius lacked sufficient reinforcements and resources, limiting his ability to launch a comprehensive counteroffensive. His appeals to Emperor Justinian I for additional support were largely unheeded, leaving the Byzantine position in Italy precarious. By 549, Totila had recaptured Rome once again, facing minimal resistance due to the weakened Byzantine presence. Between 549 and 550, he consolidated Gothic control over central and southern Italy, launching raids into Sicily and attempting to establish a foothold along the Dalmatian coast. Totila's efforts included diplomatic overtures to Constantinople, proposing terms that would grant the Goths autonomy under nominal Byzantine overlordship. Justinian rejected these proposals outright, choosing instead to launch a renewed military campaign to reclaim Italy, entrusting the task to his elderly and unassuming Grand Chamberlain Narses, whose arrival would spell disaster for the Ostrogoths. In a curious move, Justinian's idea of injecting new blood into the war effort came in the form of a 70-year-old eunuch, albeit one with a superbly cunning mind and a ruthless gift for warfare. In a world where battlefield glory was typically earned on the field by military aristocrats or upstart warriors, Narses stood out as a true anomaly. Born around 478 AD in Pasarmenia, he was of Armenian descent and entered imperial service at a young age as part of the eunuch Spatharios bodyguard corps. By the 530s, he had risen to the prestigious position of Grand Chamberlain, Propositus Sacri Cubiculi, under Emperor Justinian I. Though he lacked a traditional military background, Narses wielded immense political influence at court, with direct access to the emperor and his finances, making him one of the most powerful figures in the empire. His political finesse was first displayed during the tremendous Nika riots of 532, a violent and widespread uprising in Constantinople. Sparked by fierce rivalries between the city's chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens, the unrest quickly escalated into a full-blown rebellion that threatened imperial authority itself. As the capital teetered on the edge of collapse, Narses played a key role in turning the tide. Sent by Justinian into the hippodrome, he leveraged gold, promises, and clever diplomacy to convince key leaders of the Blue faction to abandon the revolt. The defection split the rioters, giving Justinian's generals, Belisarius and Mundus, the opportunity to crush the rebellion. Narses' success in helping suppress the Nika riots unexpectedly earned him command of a moderately sized army, which was dispatched to support Belisarius in the Italian campaign. He arrived in June 538, likely landing at Ancona, with a force of around 7,000 soldiers, drawn from various allied and mercenary groups. Upon arriving in Italy, he met Belisarius at Firmum, where a council of war was held to discuss the ongoing siege of Ariminum and the conduct of the commander John the Armenian, a close associate of Narses. Though John had acted insubordinately, Narses defended him, warning that the fall of Ariminum could tip the war in the Goths' favor. Acting swiftly, he and Belisarius led a column of troops through the inland mountains to relieve the city from the northwest. However, Narses' presence in Italy soon became a source of friction. Rather than reinforcing Belisarius' leadership, he frequently challenged his authority, consulted rival commanders, and undermined unity within the Byzantine ranks. The growing tension between the two men disrupted operations and contributed to a major setback, the loss of Mediolanum to the Goths. As a result, Narses was recalled to Constantinople in disgrace. Still, Justinian did not forget his favorite eunuch. Narses returned to court duties, quietly waiting as the war in Italy dragged on without conclusion. Between 540 and 550, the Byzantines steadily lost ground to the resurgent Gothic King Totila, whose campaigns reclaimed vast swathes of the peninsula. Repeated appeals by Belisarius for reinforcements were ignored or delayed. When it became clear that the situation required drastic change, Justinian made a surprising decision. In 551, Narses, by now in his 70s, was appointed commander-in-chief of the Italian campaign. This time, there was no ambiguity. He was granted full autonomy, unbridled access to the imperial treasury, and supreme authority over both civil and military affairs. Unlike Belisarius, whose efforts had been hampered by court intrigue and limited resources, Narses was given the freedom to recruit widely and pay his troops generously. While Belisarius may have been viewed by Emperor Justinian as a potential political threat due to his youth and military success, Narses, restrained, loyal, and unlikely to challenge the throne in his old age, was a much safer choice. This made him the emperor's new right-hand man in the grueling struggle to reclaim Italy. Narses assembled one of the most ethnically diverse armies of the age: Byzantine regulars, Huns, Lombards, Heruli, Slavs, Armenians, and even Gothic defectors. By the time he crossed into Italy, his force numbered over 30,000, disciplined, well-paid, and organized. Yet Narses did not rush into battle with his superior numbers as his predecessors Alexander and Constantian had done at the debacle at Faventia. Advancing along the Adriatic coast, he moved with thorough logistical precision, capturing fortified towns and securing supply lines as he progressed. In an effort to disrupt said supply lines and prevent reinforcements, Totila assembled a fleet of approximately 300 warships to challenge Byzantine naval dominance. A significant portion of this fleet, comprising 47 ships, was dispatched to blockade the port city of Ancona, a critical Byzantine stronghold on the Adriatic coast. The remaining Gothic ships conducted raids along the coasts of Epirus and the Ionian Islands. In response, Byzantine General John, not the Armenian but the sanguinary, coordinated a relief effort. John, stationed in Salona, modern-day Split, Croatia, mobilized 38 veteran-manned ships, while General Valerian contributed an additional 12 vessels from Ravenna. The combined fleet of 50 ships engaged the Gothic navy near Sena Gallica, modern Senegalia, in the autumn of 551. The ensuing battle was characterized by fierce close-quarters combat, as 6th century warships lacked rams and relied instead on missile exchanges and boarding actions. The seasoned Byzantine crews maintained tight formations and discipline, while the less experienced Gothic sailors struggled to coordinate effectively. The result was a crushing Gothic defeat. 36 of their ships were lost, and the rest were scuttled by their own crews to avoid capture. This decisive Byzantine victory not only lifted the siege of Ancona, but also shattered Gothic naval ambitions. Following this crushing naval victory, Narses had secured not only the Adriatic coast, but also ensured uninterrupted logistic lines to his growing army. With the sea lanes cleared of Gothic interference, he resumed his calculated advance into the heart of the Italian peninsula in the spring of 552. His route, cutting through northeastern Italy, took him inland through the Julian Alps Po Plain and then down the rugged Apennines, avoiding the battered, war-torn corridors of central and southern Italy, still in Gothic control. Narses' march was methodical. He was determined to avoid the mistakes of previous Byzantine campaigns. Rather than stretch his forces thin by garrisoning every city, Narses focused on maintaining momentum, cohesion, and control of critical nodes, ports, river crossings, and fortified mountain passes. He moved with the support of detailed logistical planning employing wagons, pack animals, and a network of forward scouts and supply officers to prevent the long delays and famines that had plagued earlier expeditions. By mid-year, Narses had reached the Umbrian frontier, a region that formed the northern gateway to Totila's remaining heartlands. The Gothic king, fully aware of the existential threat posed by this new Byzantine strategy, was no longer willing to rely on attrition warfare. The loss of Gothic naval power at Sena Gallica had been a harsh blow, isolating his forces in Italy and cutting off any possibility of reinforcement or resupply from outside the peninsula. Realizing that Narses was advancing with an army stronger, more disciplined, and better equipped than any Byzantine force in the war thus far, Totila chose not to defend Ravenna or Rome directly. Instead, he moved swiftly to intercept the Byzantines inland, hoping to catch them before they could descend into the central plains of Latium or Campania. Totila's army, though still quite numerous, had suffered significant attrition over the years. He relied heavily on mobile cavalry units and loyal Gothic veterans, while also calling upon every available contingent from the remnants of Gothic strongholds scattered across Italy. The two armies drew close to the small but strategically important town of Taginae, also called Busta Gallorum by Procopius, nestled in the Apennine foothills. The terrain was rugged, with narrow valleys and forested ridges, favorable for ambushes and light cavalry skirmishes, but risky for large-scale engagements like the clash that was about to occur. Control of the nearby Roman road networks, particularly the Via Flaminia, offered the victor a direct corridor to the rest of central Italy. Narses established his position in open ground near the road, choosing a site that gave him space to deploy his army fully and reduce the threat of being outmaneuvered. That morning, Narses, thorough as ever, made his final rounds through the camp not as a grand orator, but as a quiet presence, pausing to speak with officers, inspect troop formations, and verify logistics firsthand. The eastern troops, Armenians, Greeks, and Anatolian auxiliaries, lit small fires near their tents and gathered around them to recite prayers in Greek and Syriac. The Psalms of David were whispered by devout soldiers, invoking divine favor against the heretical Goths. Many had carried small icons or relics into the field, worn crosses, palm-sized mosaics of saints, or strips of cloth blessed in Constantinople. The Hun, Heruli, Lombard, and other barbarian mercenaries prepared in their own way, sharpening blades, marking shields with familiar symbols, and sharing drinks by the fire. Some murmured old war chants or offered quiet rituals to ancestral spirits. Though a eunuch shaped by years of deadly court intrigue, Narses was also deeply pious. On the eve of battle, he gathered his senior officers in a makeshift chapel tent for a quiet prayer service. The army's chaplain blessed the troops, sprinkling holy water and burning incense. Narses offered no grand speech, only a few calm, calculated words. Across the hills, in a scattered camp along the ridges and woodlands, Totila's army prepared for the battle ahead as well. The king, composed in gilded scale armor, rode among his men, exchanging greetings and brief words of encouragement. Where possible, he addressed soldiers by name, reminding them they fought not for conquest, but for the survival of their kingdom and people. That evening, Totila shared a simple meal with his officers and veterans. He spoke of Faventia, the capture of Rome, and past victories won against terrible odds. His words, measured but firm, appealed to Gothic pride and endurance. The soldiers followed familiar pre-battle customs, braiding hair or tying leather tokens to their arms. Beliefs often blended. Christian prayers from Aryan priests mixed with quiet nods to older pantheons of pre-monotheistic tradition. Before nightfall, Totila stood before his elite cavalry. He pledged to lead from the front, a gesture of unity and resolve. His presence the next day would carry weight, on the battlefield and beyond. The terrain surrounding Taginae was characterized by narrow valleys, hemmed in by wooded hills, providing Totila with a potential opportunity to force the Byzantines into a confined engagement zone. The idea, according to later sources such as Procopius, was to draw the numerically superior but less mobile Byzantine forces into a narrow front, where the Gothic cavalry, Totila's battlefield trump card, might achieve decisive shock effect through a concentrated charge. Narses, however, did not conform to Gothic expectations. Drawing on a blend of late Roman discipline and emerging Byzantine doctrine, he avoided being drawn into Totila's chosen ground. Instead, he selected a broad open section of the Via Flaminia near Taginae, slightly elevated and wide enough to accommodate his full army in depth. There, he deployed his forces in a shallow crescent formation, infantry in the center, archers fanning out on either side, and cavalry hidden further along the flanks. With this layout, Narses denied Totila the opportunity to dictate the terms of battle, forcing the Goths to engage on open terrain. Narses's army, estimated at over 30,000 troops, included regular Byzantine infantry, tagmata, Armenian and Slavic auxiliaries, and several contingents of allied or mercenary cavalry, including aforementioned Huns, Heruli, Lombards, and even Gothic defectors. The composition of the force reflected both the logistical capabilities of the Eastern Empire and its reliance on federated and contracted warriors to supplement its native manpower base. Despite the diversity of the troops, Narses maintained effective command cohesion through a hierarchical chain of command and a centralized system of logistical and financial support. The deployment reflected his strategic intent. At the center of the Byzantine line stood approximately 5,000 heavily armored infantry, likely including kontophoroi, spearmen trained for static defense. This central block was displayed in dense formation and flanked by two wings of archers, each comprising roughly 4,000 units. These archers were drawn up in successive ranks, allowing for sustained volley fire. While the front ranks fired their arrows, the rear ranks reloaded, ensuring a continuous stream of deadly missiles. On the flanks, hidden behind low ridges and partially screened by forested areas, Narses positioned two strong bodies of cavalry, likely 4,000 to 5,000 riders each, composed primarily of Heruli and Lombard heavy cavalry. Behind the central infantry, in reserve, he stationed another 4,000 cavalrymen, forming a third line capable of reinforcing weak points or capitalizing on breakthroughs. Totila, in contrast, commanded a smaller and more tactically constrained force, estimated at around 20,000 men. Of these, 6,000 were heavy cavalry. The remaining 14,000 infantry were arranged in traditional linear formations. Totila did not immediately commit to battle. Instead, he initiated a series of delaying maneuvers that scholars interpret as a mixture of tactical hesitation and psychological manipulation. The most notable of these was his personal display before his troops, described in detail in Procopius's Wars. Clad in ornate, gold-plated armor adorned with purple accents, a color traditionally associated with royalty, he rode a large, powerful horse into the open space between the two forces. There, he performed a series of impressive feats, galloping in tight circles, executing sudden turns, and repeatedly hurling his spear high into the air, catching it deftly as it descended. Procopius, a contemporary historian, likened this performance to that of a trained dancer, noting the king's exceptional agility and control. The purpose of this display has been the subject of scholarly debate. Some interpret it as a morale-boosting gesture, aimed at inspiring his troops by showcasing their leader's courage and skill. Others suggest it was intended to intimidate the Byzantine forces, or to distract them while awaiting the arrival of an additional Gothic cavalry force of 2,000 men commanded by Tea, one of Totila's most trusted generals. Regardless of the intent, the spectacle inadvertently provided Narses with additional time to organize his forces and solidify his defensive positions even more. During this period of delay, a duel took place between a Gothic warrior named Coccus and a Byzantine horseman named Anzalas, an Armenian like Narses. Anzalas emerged victorious, delivering a symbolic blow to Gothic morale. Eventually, with his reinforcements in place, Totila withdrew briefly to change into less conspicuous battle attire. The king was ready to finally strike first. When Totila finally committed to battle, it was in his characteristically resolute manner. Confident in the strength of his elite cavalry and eager to break the Byzantine vanguard with one devastating first strike, he ordered a sudden, full frontal assault, aimed directly at the heart of Narses's formation. His veteran Gothic horsemen, numbering in the thousands and arranged in a compact wedge, began their charge. They thundered down the gentle slope of the battlefield, hooves drumming against the earth in unison, kicking up dust as they descended toward what they believed was a vulnerable segment of the Byzantine infantry line. This tactic had served Totila well in previous engagements. The wedge formation, designed to concentrate force at a single point, had proven devastating when used against poorly prepared or scattered enemy units. But this time, the enemy was neither unprepared nor overextended. Narses had anticipated this very tactic and had crafted a defense designed to turn Totila's greatest strength against him. The Goths charged straight into Narses's crescent, unaware they were entering a trap. From both flanks, volleys of arrows rained down on the charging Gothic horsemen. Because of the curvature of the Byzantine formation, the missile fire was not only direct, but also angled inward from both sides. Classic enfilade fire. The use of staggered ranks ensured that arrows came in near-continuous waves, with one line firing as another reloaded. The psychological and physical impact was immediate and extremely severe. Procopius described the barrage as so dense it darkened the sun. A rendition of Thermopylae in an Italian setting. Even before they reached the Byzantine line, the cohesion of the Gothic wedge had begun to unravel. As the charge slowed and buckled under the relentless missile fire, Narses gave the signal for the next phase of his strategy. From both flanks, allied cavalry units, primarily Heruli and Lombards, emerged from their concealed positions and swept forward in a pincer movement. Their attack was not spontaneous. It was precisely timed and executed according to a prearranged plan, demonstrating a high level of discipline and tactical coordination. The flanking horsemen smashed into the sides of the disorganized Gothic cavalry, turning disorder into pure chaos. At the same moment, the Byzantine reserve cavalry surged forward to complete the encirclement. What had begun as a daring frontal charge had now become a trap, closing from three sides. The Gothic cavalry, Totila's elite force and battlefield spearhead, found itself surrounded, with no clear path of retreat. The battlefield's narrow confines, a result of Totila's own positional choices, only worsened the situation. Hemmed in by hills and unable to maneuver laterally, the Gothic riders were crushed, one unit after another. Meanwhile, the infantry positioned behind the cavalry, likely intended to follow through once the charge had broken the enemy line, stood frozen. With the cavalry being torn apart before their eyes, and no clear command structure in place, panic spread. Some units attempted to flee the field entirely. Others broke formation and were cut down by Byzantine infantry advancing in coordination with the cavalry envelopment. Totila's gamble had failed. His reliance on shock tactics, so effective in previous battles, had met a countermeasure far more sophisticated than anything the Goths had encountered before. The open terrain, the lethal discipline of the Byzantine archers and cavalry, and the use of a carefully layered defense proved decisive. It was not brute force that carried the day for Narses, but a brilliant synthesis of Roman tactical legacy and adaptive battlefield strategy. In a single, stunning blow, the Gothic cavalry was decimated, Totila's main offensive capability destroyed. The decisive moment of the Battle of Taginae came with the death of Totila. Contemporary sources differ on the exact circumstances. Some suggest he was slain in the thick of the cavalry engagement, while others claim he was struck down while attempting to escape the encirclement on a fresh mount. What is undisputed, however, is that his fall shattered the last vestiges of Gothic resistance. In the chaos that followed, his body was retrieved by loyal followers and subsequently buried in secret, likely to prevent it from being desecrated or paraded by the Byzantines as a symbol of imperial triumph. Totila's death was more than a battlefield casualty. It marked the collapse of the Gothic command structure and the end of their most charismatic and capable leader. He had been not only a skilled commander, but a unifying symbol for the Gothic army and people, and without him, their will to fight dissolved. Panic spread quickly through the remaining infantry ranks. Deprived of cavalry support and direction, many Gothic foot soldiers broke and fled. Some were able to escape into the surrounding hills, but many were cut down in the ensuing Byzantine advance. It was Totila's second-in-command Teia who rallied the remaining Gothic troops to safety after the death of their king. Narses, for his part, ensured that the victory was not squandered in reckless pursuit. Maintaining strict discipline, he ordered a deliberate, coordinated advance rather than allowing his troops to scatter in a chaotic chase. This measured approach enabled the Byzantines to eliminate any pockets of resistance efficiently, while preserving their own cohesion and momentum. The aftermath of the battle left no doubt. The Gothic cause, already weakened, had suffered a mortal blow. By the end of the engagement, Gothic casualties were estimated at between 8,000 and 10,000, with the vast majority of losses sustained by the cavalry, the core striking force of Totila's army. Byzantine casualties, by contrast, were reportedly low, likely not exceeding 1,500, thanks to Narses's effective deployment of missile troops, careful use of terrain, and the precisely timed counter-offensive. The Battle of Taginae, while not the final confrontation of the Gothic War, was both its largest pitched battle and its most decisive moment. It marked the culmination of Gothic strategic overreach and Byzantine operational brilliance. Narses' leadership in the battle demonstrated an exceptional command of 6th century warfare. His use of combined arms, coordinated timing, and defensive envelopment showed a deep understanding of both classical Roman tactics and the evolving realities of early medieval conflict. More devastating than the tactical defeat was the death of Totila, whose loss shattered Gothic morale and eliminated their most dynamic and unifying figure. His elite cavalry, the hardened veterans of campaigns at Faventia, Rome and beyond, had been virtually annihilated. The Ostrogothic Kingdom, though not yet finished, had been broken. In the aftermath of the battle, Narses moved quickly to consolidate imperial control. Key cities such as Rome and Ravenna were brought back under Byzantine administration, and new garrisons were installed to maintain order. With Totila dead and his elite cavalry, which had turned the tide in many earlier battles, almost completely destroyed, the Goths lost both crucial military strength and morale. A new king was elected, and it was none other than Teia, the sole surviving commander from the disastrous Gothic cavalry charge and the last remaining chieftain of his people. He would inherit a fractured kingdom. Most major strongholds had already fallen, and coordinated resistance was becoming increasingly difficult. 2 decades of uninterrupted warfare had devastated infrastructure, agriculture, and population centers. Much of the countryside was severely depopulated, trade routes had collapsed, and disease and famine had taken their toll once the fighting was over. Imperial control, while restored in name, was often limited in practice. Outside of major cities, Byzantine authority was weak, and order was difficult to enforce. This contributed to a growing shift in how local Italics viewed the conflict. Ironically, many Latins had come to see the barbarian Ostrogoths, who had ruled through existing Roman institutions and made efforts to preserve local stability, as more favorable than their imperial successors, who in contrast had legitimized their rule through brute force and authoritarian command. But one final confrontation still lay ahead, a last desperate effort to decide the fate of Italy. On the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, Gothic and Roman forces would meet in battle once more, and only one would emerge from the ashes with a true claim to the Italian peninsula. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.